coming. My name is James Weaver at the Department of City Planning and Engagement. See a lot of familiar faces here. We are here tonight to talk about density. So with that, I will get right into it. Let's see. So for those of you that have been on this before, I'll get through a brief presentation. We can do a question and answer comment session. Please remain muted when it's not your turn to speak. We had over 60 people sign up for this, so I don't want any side conversations going on. And please limit your comments. So this is a public meeting to discuss the proposed text amendments to allow for staff to obtain feedback on the project. We're here to facilitate the meeting and answer any process-related questions. I want to reiterate that no decisions are being made at this meeting. So just a quick background. On May 7th, we received an ordinance sponsored by Councilmember Liz Keating that would remove density limitations within the zoning code for all districts that allow multifamily housing. It was referred to us as our department deals with zoning map and zoning text amendments, taking them through the legislative process. This is one of the strategies of the city administration recommended for increasing the supply and availability of housing based on a March of 2021 report to City Council. So here are the existing regulations. This is number of square footage of the lot required per unit. So in the RMX, it's currently 2,500 square feet per unit per parcel area. So if you have a 7,500 square foot lot, you could build 3 units. Now RMX is 1 to 3 units. So 3 units is the maximum number that can be built in the RMX district. Under these regulations and under the proposed changes, the maximum is still 3 units in RMX. And the residential multifamily 2.0, it's 2,000 square feet per unit per lot area. So 10,000 square foot lot, you can currently build 5 units if it's zoned this RM 2.0. RM 1.2 is 1,200 square feet per unit per parcel area. So if you had a 2,400 square foot lot, you can build 2 units. RM 0.7 is 700 square feet of unit per parcel area. Office limited is 1,200. Office general is 700. Commercial districts are 700. Urban mix is 700. Manufacturing limited is 2,000. And the residential, riverfront residential is also 2,000. Now in commercial districts, rehabbing an existing building only requires 500 square feet per parcel area instead of the 700. You've seen a number of variances for density since 2017. Now, most of them are in over the Rhine, but there are a few others in other places as well. So this was one of the ideas to help create more housing. So I do want to reiterate, as I have every meeting, that these regulations only affect the land area per unit or density limitations. They do not impact building height, building setbacks. Additional regulations from an overlay district, such as a historic district, hillside overlay district, urban design overlay district. There are still parking requirements. Now I know in downtown and over the Rhine, there's an urban parking overlay district where there are not parking requirements, off-street parking requirements anymore, but everywhere else there are parking requirements that must be met for more density. And I want to reiterate that single family zoning districts are not affected by this proposal. So the idea is that the same building envelope, the same size, say they need $10,000 per month to recoup construction costs. So if there was 1 unit, you would need, that rent would be, or mortgage would be $10,000 a month. So if it was 4 units in the same box, it would be $2,500 a month. Or if it was 9 units, it would be $1,111 per month. So it's still the same building envelope, same height, same setbacks, same requirements, but the more units means that they can be more affordable based on the square footage pricing. So other cities are also looking at adding more housing units. Minneapolis permits 2 and 3 family buildings in previously designated single family districts. Portland is increasing the floor area ratio for multi-building units. So for instance, if a floor area ratio was 1, a 1-story building, if there were no setbacks, could take up the entire lot, or it could take up the 2-story building could take up half the lot, or a 4-story building could take up a quarter of the lot. But that's floor area ratio. And then Seattle is permitting accessory dwelling units on single family lots. So you have the garage apartment behind on a detached garage behind the house or something like that. That's permitted now in Seattle. So just a quick background of how far we've come. We've held the first public staff conference for this back in May of this year. And this was presented at the City Planning Commission meeting on June 4th. There was concern that neighborhoods weren't given enough time to look at the original proposal. So the Planning Commission held this item. We received a lot of feedback from that meeting, updated the website. This QR code works if you'd like a link to the project website. If you received the email or the mailed notice from me, this with QR code that takes you to the website was also part of that. So we held a second staff conference back in August. There were some people in support stating that new construction is generally more expensive, which filters down to the housing costs and rent. Adding additional supply allows demand pressure to slow. Many communities that want more amenities, such as additional parks, grocery stores, retail offerings, require more people, more density to support it. More housing is needed at all price points, not just affordable housing. Construction costs to develop or rehab small properties aren't worth it without adding additional density or having a government subsidy or some type of subsidy. Then solving a lack of housing units will require incremental, broad-based change. Now, there have been several statements of concern as well. One was that, more supportive, that neighborhoods are supportive of housing that is more affordable, but didn't like this blanket type approach. These first two came from a letter that we were sent from Invest in Neighborhoods on behalf of the neighborhood community councils, that this would remove the ability for neighborhoods to have their voices heard, having influence on development in their neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are different, have different needs and different concerns. Adding density can overburden existing infrastructure. Looking at deregulation of certain things needs to be looked at comprehensively instead of one by one. Concern that this proposal can make it easier to steer low-income housing into existing low-income communities. Increasing the density based on the graphic that we have provided, saying that this brings more 1 to 2 bedroom units, but that families typically need at least 3 bedrooms, and that tax abatements, which is more of that incentive, saying different things. So we heard the feedback, and we heard some changes. So the proposed changes in front of you today are, instead of allowing unlimited density in the multifamily zoning district, residential multifamily zoning districts that allow more than 3 units, instead of allowing unlimited density, only allowing double the density of what's permitted now. So an RM 2.0 is currently 2,000 square feet per unit per lot. So the proposal is 1,000 square feet per unit per lot. For RM 1.2, it's currently 1,200 square feet per unit per lot. And under this proposal, it's 600 square feet per unit per lot. And the RM 0.7, instead of 700 square feet per lot, it'd be 350 square feet per unit per lot. Another thing that we did when we looked at a few examples of how this proposal could affect neighborhoods, we looked at limiting the height in RM 0.7, which is currently unlimited, as long as the front, side, and rear setbacks move in for height over 35 feet. The higher you go, the larger the setbacks have to be. But it's currently unlimited. So we said limit this to 50 feet. And that was out of concern due to some properties where if the developer was able to build a parking structure on the first few floors of the building, they could build a really tall, really high building that would not be in the scale of that a neighborhood would like to see. So we did hear that and made that change. I do want to reiterate again that the maximum number of new residential units permitted in the RMX zoning district is still 3. That isn't changing. That's what it is now, and that's what it's supposed to remain as. So here's that graphic again of under the existing regulations on a 10,000 square foot lot, you could build 5 units. You'd need 8 parking spaces. Under the proposed regulations, you could build 1 unit per every 1,000 square feet. So that would allow a maximum of 10 units. There would be 15 parking spaces required. And then these additional regulations as well aren't going away. So that's that 1.5 spaces per unit, 45-foot maximum building height, 20-foot front yard setback, side setbacks, buffer yard standards, depending on different, the adjacent zoning district, and then any overlay districts. I see someone has raised their hand. Please hold all comments until the end. We will get to you. So just to go over this again, for multifamily, in the RMX, it removes the minimum lot size requirement of 2,500 square feet, but it still does not allow more than 3 units per lot. I think back in August, we heard concern about that a lot from a number of people, but with the RMX, the maximum number of units is still 3. So this is what I discussed earlier, where 2,000 square feet for RM 2.0 is now 1,000 square feet. For RM 1.2, it was 1,200 square feet, and we're proposing 600. And then RM 0.7, it was 700 square feet, and we're proposing 350 instead of that unlimited. And then changing that maximum height of multifamily to maximum of 50 feet instead of unlimited with the additional setbacks. The other districts remain the same. As previously, this would remove the minimum lot size requirement in office districts, commercial districts, the urban mixed district, manufacturing districts, and riverfront districts. So throughout this process too, we've been asked a number of questions. And this sheet is on the website, I believe, under the August 4th staff conference. But how does this address affordable housing? Creating more housing units will increase more supply, which over time can help lower housing costs overall. No one is pretending this is a magic bullet that will just solve all of our affordable housing issues, but it is one step to help with that. Other regulations do still apply, including maximum building height setbacks, which is the distance from property lines, parking requirements. It's within an overlay district, buffering from other zoning districts, et cetera. All of those regulations still apply. All we're talking about is density. One thing that someone brought up at the last staff conference was parking garages. But for smaller projects, structured parking costs about, above ground structured parking costs about $21,000 a space, and below ground costs upwards of $50,000 dollars a space to put that in. And then another question was, which I think is on the next slide, is if we were just going to see a number of parking lots and parking garages in residential multifamily districts. And I do want to point out too that parking garages are considered structures. So if they're in the basement or on the first few floors, they would have to, they would still have to meet that maximum building envelope with the setbacks and the height. So someone asked if parking garages would replace single family homes, and parking facilities, which include parking lots and parking garages, are a conditional use in the residential multifamily zoning districts of RM 0.7, RM 1.2, and RM 2.0. These are a conditional use, which is a public hearing where surrounding property owners and the community council is notified. They are not permitted in the RMX, which is that 1 to 3 family, or in single family zoning districts. And this was written as a citywide text amendment and not overlay districts, because the administration believes that housing is a regional issue, and this proposed ordinance was written to make a greater impact citywide. So now is the time for question and answer. Before I do that, I do want to turn this over to Councilmember Keating. I believe she has a few words to say before we get into the question, answer, and comment portion. So Councilmember Keating, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight to listen, to share your concerns, to ask your questions, and get your feedback. We really appreciate that. I want to thank the Department of City Planning and the City Administration for all your work on this and the time that you've spent with community engagement. I've really appreciated all your efforts. I wanted to share just some of the goals as to why I wanted to work on this issue, and some of the goals that we have overall as a city and within our neighborhoods that I think this is addressing. Number one, a lot of us have talked about expanding our tax base. As you know, 70% of our general fund comes from earnings tax. And in this post-COVID world, people are allowed to work from home, and we are no longer allowed to collect earnings tax from people who are living outside the city and working from home. The city needs to be able to expand that tax base to be able to continue to operate. So finding more ways to have more people living within the city, whether they're working from home or working in an office, is one of the ways to do that. We've heard a lot about housing affordability. In the past 10 years, the census has shown that the city has grown by over 12,000 residents, but we've actually lost over 2,000 housing units. So the demand continues to go up, but the supply is going down right now. That is increasing the cost significantly. If we don't build more housing units, the cost to live here is going to be astronomical, and we're going to lose people to outside the city. And so we're not going to be able to continue our growth, and we're not going to be expanding that tax base. We've heard a lot about wanting to support our neighborhood business districts and small businesses. Having density will be able to build more foot traffic, be able to help support those businesses in our 52 neighborhoods. We've talked a lot about sustainability, having more people living, and having more density within our neighborhoods is going to create more walkability, have more people on our bike paths walking and supporting our neighborhood business districts, and we're going to have less people driving around. If we have people living outside the city, driving into the city all the time, that's not good for the environment. It's going to create a lot more traffic. So that hits another bucket that most people in the city have talked about of wanting to be able to do. A really, really important one is desegregation. The data shows that pro-density zoning actually helps desegregate cities. And I'm happy to share a report that shows that, some of those studies and how that works. Cincinnati is one of the most segregated cities in the country. This type of zoning is actually going to help improve that and make Cincinnati better and desegregate us. And it also helps remove blight. This is going to make it more affordable to be able to take care of a lot of our blighted buildings. And from the historical context, when these buildings were built, they were meant for smaller units. So this fits in with the historical context. and it makes it more affordable to be able to rehab and redevelop a lot of those blighted and empty buildings. So those are some of the buckets that we heard a lot over the past year of goals of council members, of the community, and from our neighborhoods. And this is how this ordinance fits in with that. From a community engagement standpoint, this is, I believe, the second staff conference that we've had. I've had several town halls. I've had, I know a lot of these faces joined us with the Invest in Neighborhoods town hall with the community councils, a town hall with home base with our neighborhood CDCs. We have sat on several panels discussing this topic in this specific ordinance. We have met with individual community councils. We met with individual neighborhood CDCs. And this past year being a campaign year, spent a lot of time talking to individuals throughout all our neighborhoods, talking about this and how this fits in with all the major goals of our city. So that and having all those conversations and listening, we have made some changes, as James touched on. We want to be receptive to the feedback while also being able to look forward in building our city for where we want to go in the next 10, 20 years. So really appreciate all your time and looking forward to listening to your questions. And thank you.
Thank you for that great introduction. Will Gerhardt, did you want to say anything further, or are you just here to listen? And for those of you raising your hands, I will get to you. We have 44 participants in this meeting, and I'm going to call on people in the order that you've signed up. So I don't think Councilmember Lemon Kearney is here. Okay.
James, I'll jump in. It's Billy. I don't have much more to add. Thanks to the planning staff, and thanks Councilmember Keating and her staff, and thank you, Councilmember. I think you really articulated eloquently a lot of the points we've been talking about from the administration side of things as well. So look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts and feedback today and continuing the engagement process here tonight.
Great, thank you, Billy. Robbie Bluestein, if you're here, the floor is yours. Okay. Elizabeth Storr, I think I saw you here. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate Council Member Keating, your going over the goals of what we're trying to do here. I live in Mount Lookout and I have a business in Linwood. I still feel that due to our geography in our hills, our neighborhoods, like in my neighborhood, basically we have streets that are pretty tiny and follow along like what were creek beds. So, and this hills rise up steeply on either side, as you know, I think. I remember seeing you over at Christ the King on voting day. And anyway, I would like to have the opportunity for communities, for neighborhoods to weigh in a little more on density, particularly lining the streets, like the multifamily lining the streets. One question I do have, this for sort of overall, is has there been any attention to parts of the city that were redlined in the past to try to help those areas out more? That's one question. Thanks.
So I don't have an answer to that. This proposal is for the areas that allow multifamily housing, which are the RM 0.7, RM 1.2, RM 2.0, And then also commercial districts, office districts, and some of the industrial districts. So this proposal, those neighborhoods that were redlined in the past probably have multifamily zoning. Areas that weren't redlined have multifamily and commercial zoning. So this proposal is, the text amendment that covers the whole city for all of those zoning districts, and it doesn't really specify, which areas do or don't, or were or were not redlined. It's just anywhere that has the multifamily, that allows multifamily, is what this proposal is for.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for this opportunity.
Of course. If you have your hands up, please put them down. I will call on you as in the order that I received in the order that you signed up. So Valerie Daly, I believe you're next.
Thanks, James. I want to thank Councilmember Keating and the Planning Department for the updates that have been made. I think they respond to comments that you've heard in town halls and previous meetings. I think I made this comment last time, and I just wanted to reiterate, our community councils have varying degrees of sophistication around things like zoning. And I think that providing those community councils, every community council, with a map that shows exactly where this change will occur could help them communicate it to residents, work with developers. There's a whole host of things that could support. So I would urge the planning department to make the proposal geographically as transparent as you can.
Okay, anything else?
That's all for me. Thanks, James.
Great, thank you. Joe Grow.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. Essentially, nothing has really changed on my objections from previous meetings has changed. We're opposed to any RM at all. We think, and especially neighborhoods like Oakley, where the cost of property is high, what it's going to do is developers are going to be attracted to come into areas that already are our lowest cost of housing areas. They're going to come in, they're going to pay $300,000 for a property, tear it down, rebuild. And even if they put in, say, 8 units, the rent is still going to be higher than what they were charging now, just because the cost involved. You're not going to see any lower cost housing. You're going to see properties that may be 1 or 2 family now, where a family can actually stay. If you put in bigger units, it's going to force families out. So we're trying to make it more attractive for people, trying to fight everything we can to make it more affordable, to keep it affordable for folks in Oakley. This is going to drive people out of Oakley to other areas. That is the primary reason, number one, why I will be against anything that is citywide that takes control out of Oakley. If you want to come to us, if a developer has something and there's variances we go to and we do on an individual basis, we have no problem doing that. We have no problem with density in general, but you give these broad-based things, if you know anything about the development world, they're going to come to areas like Hyde Park, Mountain Lookout, Madisonville, Pleasant Ridge, and this is where they're going to look to take advantage of that because they can make the biggest profit. I think it's a joke to think that RM is going to work anyway, and I am 100%. I don't mind the other parts of it, but the RM, as long as that's in there, I will be opposed to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Phil Denning. Okay, Brian Ogawa.
Hey, James, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I was having some problems. This is Brian Ogawa with the port, and we're just here to support the density text amendment. We've had a lot of projects being the owners of the last resort of a lot of blighted delinquent property across the city and the county, but particularly we're more involved in our underserved neighborhoods. And time and time again, we see applicants, not necessarily bigger developers, but your more part-time growing contractors growing into developers, having trouble financing their projects because they can't get the density they need to support the returns. So just leaving a lot of opportunity in the city to grow and, you know, not building our developer pipeline. And so for all those reasons, we're supporting this amendment. We think, you know, overarchingly will add to a lot of filtering of housing stock, increasing the housing stock, having housing stock being invested in, those that aren't are filtering down to more affordable rents.
Great, thank you. Kurt Grossman.
There we go. I was trying to get it to unmute. I think that we are coming at this to some extent in the wrong direction. It seems that because there was some work doing variances, we now want to open it up to everybody to have an automatic right to make more density. I think just because something maybe could be built doesn't mean it should be built. We have a lot of issues in this city to deal with, but one of them is not trying to load up on people in areas where it doesn't make sense. I'm with Joe on the notion of having certain citywide changes. I don't think they make sense. We have 52 distinct neighborhoods in this city with 52 distinct needs, wants, and desires. And we have to craft things to meet them. That's really what variances are supposed to be for, to be suitable for a neighborhood when the overall city zoning doesn't quite work. And it seems as though there's an abandonment of that opportunity and that responsibility. And I think that's inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds like Phil Denning is here. He just sent me a message. So we'll go back to you, Phil.
Hey, James, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Philip Denning with the Port. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today and how much I know staff time has gone into this. And thanks to the council member for supporting the issue. I am obviously at the Port, but I'm also a task force member of the LISC Housing Our Future group that has been meeting for a long time comprehensively about the affordable housing issue and housing in general. This is a key item as implementation item of the Housing Our Future report. And so I just want to, point that out as really important. I think there are a number of other, frankly, items that go along with that. The Chamber housing report that was produced by the Chamber, the ULI group that has been talking about transit and building on the transit levy. This is just, there are a lot of discussions in public that have been happening for which this kind of solution has been called for, requested. So I just want to call attention to that. I think that other cities, as you mentioned, are taking an even more aggressive approach. And so this, I think, is a really responsible kind of moderate nudge in the right direction. Obviously, there's more ability to do this more aggressively later, but I think this is a really nuanced approach. And, density increases neighborhood assets. It supports small businesses. It reduces barriers to small and minority developers. It really reduces potential public subsidy for vacant buildings. For a lot of the kinds of buildings that are sitting in the land bank, they require public subsidy to make possible. And so this is the kind of small nudge that reduces public subsidy to bring those properties back to life. So I think that's it. I'll conclude my comments. I think that, this is one of a number of things that we have to do to make our neighborhoods more successful. We need better pedestrian streets, better parks, better commercial corridors. But all those things, including more neighbors, are part of creating better neighborhoods. So thank you very much, James, city staff, and thanks to the council member for the time to speak.
Thank you. James Stallworth, if you're here. see him. Pete Metz.
Yeah, hi, James. Thanks for the time. Thanks to the council member and the administration for their work on this. I'm Pete Metz. I'm the director of the Connected Region at the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber. I'm here to express our support for this ordinance. As Phil mentioned, over the summer, we released a report called Embracing Growth that laid out 8 principles for we believe the community needed to embrace to grow housing in our region. Eliminating barriers to building dense housing is absolutely critical and is one of those key priorities in that Embracing Growth report. That report showed us that we are building 4 times as many single family houses as we are building housing in dense structures. It's defined as 5 or more units. As the council member said, what we know is that when you you constrain the supply of new housing, you're also increasing the cost of the existing housing. And so we recognize that this is a tool that allows, among lots of other tools, for us to tackle the issue of housing affordability in our community. Like Phil, I'm also on the Housing Our Future Steering Committee, and amending the zoning code to allow for denser development is key in those recommendations as well. There's so many ways to look at this. I'm also a Northside. I was Lifton resident. I moved from Northside, but I'm still involved in Northside, and this is certainly part of our community plans and in many other community plans across the city. So I also just want to say that I applaud the council member and the city staff for doing as much engagement as they did in this process and listening and making changes and edits to try and reflect those concerns. I think it's laudable, and I think that this gives us hopefully a platform to move forward to advance some good citywide policy. So thank you for having me. Thanks for giving me the time to speak.
Thank you. And for those of you that haven't had a meeting like this with me before, I am paying attention. I'm taking notes on my other screen. So I am listening. Just wanted to make that clear. Next one here, I only have it as Henry. If you're here.
Hi there. Yeah, this is Henry Brown from the Northside Community Council. Thanks to you, James, and to the councilors and other government people who are here. I'm really appreciative of your time and clarity on this. And I feel like your hearts are in the right place, but I feel like we've maybe missed the boat in a couple areas here that I would like to just cover briefly. One, I think we heard some people in support of the ordinance due to the possibility of like increasing the walkability of our neighborhoods via the density. But I think that as long as we aren't touching parking minimums, that we're not going to reach that level of density. So I think that would be, the intent is there, but I don't think that we're going far enough. The other place that I think that we may not be going far enough is by leaving out single family housing out of this, because the real way that we're going to integrate our neighborhoods is not by taking our medium density housing by Cincinnati standards and making it slightly more medium density, but rather by taking our low density housing and creating opportunities for medium density housing in those areas. I think alongside with that is opening up zoning restrictions so that, for example, somebody could open up, a small restaurant or grocery store within a neighborhood, because that's the only way that we're going to get to that level of walkability and actually create neighborhoods for people instead of for cars. The third place that I'm interested in just hearing some additional perspective on is you shared that slide about, you take one single unit and it's $10,000 to cover construction costs. And then you break that down into 4 and then 9 units. Obviously the construction costs increase with the number of units because you've got more plumbing, more HVAC, et cetera. But then now that we're only talking, now that we're only talking about doubling instead of like lifting the zoning altogether, does that argument still apply, or is that now out of scope given that that one unit could no longer be turning into 4 or 9 units? So those are my three main concerns, one being parking minimums, which I think should be changed as a part of this plan. The other is addressing single family housing. And then the third is just with that discussion point about actually lowering rents effectively.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that graphic is just to show that the more units you have, it's probably not as straightforward as that in real, in the real world. just to show that, more units, it's less cost per unit. And that doesn't necessarily mean that original one was a single family one. It just shows the cost of building the building. And then, as you add more units, the cost goes down, but probably not in a linear fashion like you mentioned. But thank you. Laura Castillo.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, I'm Laura Castillo from Housing Opportunities Made Equal. Very grateful for this opportunity to speak and really grateful to see the proposed changes, especially removing that unlimited cap. One thing that we do want to stress is that we do have the fear that this is part of a national trend towards increasing density for housing, but does not really do much to address the gap in affordable housing in our community. We've seen across the country that trickle down housing is not really an effective strategy. So we, similar to what Henry mentioned, we would like to see more of an emphasis on single family zoning. But yeah, again, we're really grateful for the opportunity to discuss this and still great work being done.
Great, thank you. Okay, John Osterman, if you're here.
I am. Thanks, James, and thanks for hosting. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I really appreciate Councilmember Keating's mentioning that at least some percentage of this is about generating more revenue. I strongly recommend that people on both sides of the notion that the increased housing is going to lower the cost. Read an article. It was in the Philadelphia Inquirer on December 14th. And it goes into what Laura Castillo said, is that it's not necessarily a direct relationship between increased housing and reduced value. And sometimes it's the opposite. Override might be an example of that. My other issues are historic preservation based. I've already made those, and I know that they've been marked. Thank you, James.
Thank you. John Kerr, if you're here. Debbie Dett.
Yes, again, as everyone else has said, thank you so much for including us in this conversation. I appreciate that there is the sign of compromising throughout instead of the unlimited. So I think all of that is well and good, especially when it deals with height. My concern has always been like being next to something incredibly tall when it doesn't seem to fit what the neighborhood would look like. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Aaron Kingsley. Katie Egan. Kate Botos. Devin Williams. Kim Hale McCarty. Sherry King.
Hello, hi. I'm Sherry King, and I am an exec board member for the West End Community Council, as well as the vice president of our neighborhood CDC. We do have some concerns. First off, I'd like to thank you for taking time and being transparent with the plans. That is something that I can speak on behalf of the community that we really appreciate that we have been lacking. One of our concerns is we already have a lot of density in our community and we already serve the quote unquote affordable issue in our community. We are very lucky that we have had a neighborhood housing study supplied by FC Cincinnati, and our number one desperate need is single family housing. If we remove the density limits on the West End, wouldn't that also just contribute to our concentration of poverty, considering we are now over 80% income-based deed restricted houses?
And that's not that's not something that I'm completely familiar with, but I do understand the concern, especially in the area around the stadium of that type of thing happening.
I'm sorry, you cut out. What did you say? I'm sorry.
I said I certainly understand that as a concern. Having been to a lot of those meetings with the stadium and hearing what residents have said. Especially in the West End, and with the portion of the West End that's zoned for multifamily, I certainly understand the concerns that you're referring to here, especially with that, especially looking at that housing study as well.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Crystal Kendrick.
Hello, I am Crystal Kendrick, and I too live in the Dayton Street Historic District, just down the street from Sherry. To her point, was there any consideration by neighborhood or by the densities of the neighborhood when this blanket study was created? Or was that not a factor in the analysis?
So I believe the proposal was more along the lines that housing is, the administration was looking at this more as a regional issue, not just a neighborhood by neighborhood issue. But that is something that we've heard throughout this starting back in May. That's something that we have heard a lot.
Well, my question is regarding parking enforcement. We've talked a lot about allowing for more parking or parking density, et cetera, but we haven't talked about parking enforcement. I don't know outside of the Central Business District if we have parking enforcement. Our police officers do not have the capacity for parking enforcement. And I can tell you, and living in both Walnut Hills, where my office is, and here in the West End, parking enforcement is an issue and people resolve conflict differently. There are broken down cars that are not moved or towed. There are illegally parked cars that are not addressed. There are cars that are not parked correctly that, as one lady mentioned, we live on narrow streets, so it's hard to get around if they're not parked close enough to the curb. There are food trucks and dump trucks that take up parking spaces. The police will tell you that any food truck who wants to park their truck anywhere they want and set up shop can take up as many parking spaces as they like. And I'm really concerned that we are putting more density and removing parking restrictions without the enforcement that goes along with it. And when crime goes up and all those other things happen in certain neighborhoods, we're going to be surprised. So I would ask that you include the police department or parking enforcement or whoever handles these issues to be a part of these conversations and not put it on neighbors with open record requests to continue to contact the city and then have our neighbors start to have conflict. That is a real issue in neighborhoods, and it doesn't look pretty on your charts, but I think it's something that should be included. So I'll ask you to consider inviting law enforcement or parking enforcement to be a part of this issue and to understand how they're going to ensure that our streets are safe, that we can turn left and right out of our corners without accidents, that food trucks are strategically placed in legal spaces and not just on parking spaces, et cetera.
Thank you. I will say, even though a lot of those issues are not related to my specific department, we do have an assistant city manager that's on the Zoom call, and we do have Councilmember Keating that's on the Zoom call. So I imagine that your requests are being heard by both of them, and hopefully that enforcement can increase, and especially in your neighborhood.
Thank you.
Tammy Turner Vorbeck. David Vorbeck. Shirley Rosenzweig.
Hi, thank you for having me for this meeting. I appreciate that. I'm a resident of the Pendleton neighborhood, and I'm have been living here for maybe 2 years now. And what I noticed is that Pendleton is one of the most dense neighborhood in the city. If you look at Pendleton without the casino area, is a very small area, and historically we have many of these multifamilies, historical housings, so which makes, without parking, without areas for entertainment, without any area for putting even your trash cans, it's all on the street. So you notice that what I tried to do looking into this ordinance that was proposed is if there is a differentiation for each neighborhood, and I think someone else already mentioned it, the ordinance lack of is very generic for all the neighborhood. It should be more driven to some factors that avoid to use the density changes or all these ordinances if the neighborhood has already high density. So I would like to that it would be included somehow that when you propose for a neighborhood, you show what is the proportion for density, multi-family houses, single houses, and business. So I went also and looked at the Affordable Housing Act. And if you look at the ordinance or the guidelines for applying the act, you see that they ask for a mix of income and family living, so one protects the other. So if I look for how many affordable houses is already built and in use in Pendleton in particular, I cannot find this information easy. I just go and guess by looking at how many are already being managed by these developers. And you see that maybe Pendleton has almost 40% of affordable housings, as opposed to single family houses. So, and then this ordinance will not protect us from developers to come and say we need to put more. And then what I would ask the city is to look carefully on the Affordable Housing Act, because it looks like it's a twist to use the building more affordable house just to fix a revenue problem of the city, and not using the act and the affordability and the money that comes with that for the right intent for future of the city. That's my major request.
Okay, thank you. Scott Hassel. Nina Johns. Sister Sally Duffy.
Good evening. I just want to thank Councilmember Keating. I thought she did an excellent synopsis of why this ordinance is so important. I thank the city planning for their responsiveness. And I am deeply grateful that you're listening to the concerns that have been voiced. Thank you.
Thank you. Malcolm Montgomery.
Did you say Kate Mock Elliott? Was it me?
No, I said Malcolm Montgomery.
So he
Oh,
can't, he
sorry.
can't make it.
Okay, he had emailed me, but I didn't know. Alice Emmons. Denny Dellinger.
I have no comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have. I think I had Debbie Dent on there twice. And now. Debbie Mays.
Yes, I'm here. My first concern is, what is the future timetable for this process?
That is not a question that I know the answer to my knowledge. We're having the staff conference and I am unaware of any next steps at this time.
I mean, okay, we got about what, a week to 2 weeks at the most for this particular session of the Cramley administration. And then since Councilwoman Keating has been reelected, I'm just curious in terms of why we're trying to wrap this up now and not put it as a new agenda item for 2022.
James, I can speak a little to it. So we're not wrapping it up now. We're really just doing further engagement. And so it won't be a legislative item for this year. It would be a new legislative item for next year.
So it won't go to the Planning Commission or Council until 2022?
Correct.
Okay, well, that's good to know. The other thing is, when we talk about affordable housing, okay, we're not just talking about building additional units here. We're talking about making it affordable to the people who are in different socioeconomic groups and different neighborhoods that can afford it. All right, right now we're seeing, for example, I'm in the Pendleton area now. And one of the main complaints is that we've had lots of multifamily housing that has been done by several local developers and some out of state. But what you have not seen is a better quality of housing in our neighborhood, because it seems like they keep coming back to the city in a rotational basis. And it is very difficult for anyone new to try to get in because these are the people the city uses most. And I'm concerned about that because when you look up over their development plans, we have one group that's out of state and they don't even have a development plan. So how can you say that you're dealing with affordable housing when you're dealing with developers who don't even have a constructive strategy for dealing with our needs? And to provide them with this unlimited density is to give neighborhoods the opportunity to become very vulnerable to people who do not have a constructive plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben Eilerman. Brandon Rudd.
Can you hear me?
Well, we know one thing.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Okay. I just wanted to speak out in favor of this. I'm a practicing urban planner and a Northside Community Council board member. We know from research on housing that increasing density helps with housing affordability. We also know that growing our tax base by increasing density means more money to improve our neighborhoods. A lot of people have noticed or have noted that supposedly increasing density in the city, but in fact, we've lost over 2,000 units in the past decade, including in neighborhoods like Weston, Northside, OTR, East Price Hill. All those neighborhoods have fewer units now than they did in 2010. The density regulations are redundant and just add one more layer of difficulty in an already difficult process. We also know that anti-density regulations contribute to racial and economic segregation. So if we want to be a racially and economically integrated city, we need to find ways to increase density in our neighborhoods. I think this ordinance is a great first step, should not be the end of the process. We definitely need to do more, like eliminating parking minimums, decreasing lot sizes in single family zones, and allowing apartments in more places. But I do think that this is a great first step. Thank you.
Thank you. William Wepsala. Douglas Walton. Kate Elliott.
Hi there. Give me 1 second. I got to mute something else in my background. Okay. Hi. So thank you. As everyone has said, thank you so much for having this engagement opportunity and the work that you're doing, trying to solve the housing problem. I'm part of Kennedy Heights Community Council. So I do want to reiterate Valerie's comment from ages ago about how helpful it would be if you could equip community councils with maps of the potentially affected areas. I feel like she described some community councils as not as sophisticated regarding zoning, and I would place my community council as somewhere in the middle. And that would be a huge help to communicate with our neighborhood. And so I'm sure anyone that even feels more struggling than we are, that would be a huge asset in trying to spread this message and how it could impact and make sure that everyone has a chance to respond. 1 moment, sweetheart. I have questions, but I don't know that I need them answered right now. They're just concerns I have based on things I'm hearing today and things I've thought about through this process. Today, Councilmember Keating was stating that a reason for this is increasing tax revenue. And I get that, but I'm not hearing a lot of other proposals for increasing tax revenue. So I'm curious if we're looking for other opportunities other than just density. She also stated that a goal of desegregation, because we're such a segregated city, and that's true, but we are also economically segregated. And so if there's no verbiage about affordability, and what I mean is a racial wage divide. And so if there's no verbiage about affordability, how is this going to ensure that these are racially and economically inclusive? With it being, as some people have said, with it being citywide as opposed to targeted based on neighborhood needs. Like, I understand this supply and demand. I understand this idea that if we increase housing, it will help reduce price. But I also know that that sounds like trickle down economics, and we haven't seen that impact wages. So I don't have faith in it solving housing affordability. And so I guess I'm just looking for continued communication helping me believe this, if this is really going to happen. Tax abatements were also pitched as a way to solve housing, but I only ever see tax abatement in my neighborhood on homes that are 300,000 or more. And that's not the housing that, while it's good to have that housing in your neighborhood, we need the other side of the spectrum too. And I also agree with conversations about needing to solve single housing issues as well. So thank you for everyone who's participating in this process. I just wanted to voice those comments and concerns. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ozzie Davis. Sheila Rosenthal.
Hi, James. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good.
So first of all, I think that the blanket approach is just completely wrong. The one size fits New Jersey method of solving problems in Cincinnati is not going to work. I do have a couple of questions. So the way that I read this, there was a what's proposed is a doubling of density only in the RM districts, and that all of the other ones where there's a proposed change are going to be unlimited. Is that correct?
That is correct. The change was only to double it in the RM 0.7, RM 1.2, and RM 2.0 zoning districts, and all the commercial districts, industrial, riverfront, residential, office. It would remove that density restriction completely.
And manufacturing.
And manufacturing, yes.
So, and then my next question is, as part of your presentation, you put up a slide that showed a list of variances since the variance requests since 2017. Looked like the list was about 20 long. Can you tell me how many of those variance requests were to double the density in RM districts?
I can't off the top of my head. I know.
Or to increase the others to unlimited beyond double in any of the other districts?
Let's see. I don't have that information in front of me currently. So I can see what we have and try to get back with you, but I don't have that.
I would appreciate
right
it
now.
because my belief is that none of them are going to be for those types of variance requests. So again, this feels a lot like the tail wagging the dog. And then, another thing that I wanted to address was as far as port properties goes, because they've talked about the difficulty that they have in redeveloping properties. And yet, at least in my community, we certainly have not seen any requests from the port for increased density in any redevelopment of any of those properties. And the last thing I wanted to address is the fact that there's 2,000 fewer units in the city. We had an enormous blight problem and we had federal funding to take units down, particularly in Price Hill. We did lose some units. We lost units that were in some cases even viable, that the city approved developers taking those units down. And so in many cases we have green space, useless, unutilized green space where developers took usable, functional houses that at this point in this market would have been redeveloped at this point into housing. So I think using that particular argument is not reasonable or logical to support this. And I do not support this. I think that the ramifications of it are going to be significant in many communities, and I do not believe that it is going to solve the problems that it is purported to be trying to solve. And I'll cede the rest of my time.
Yeah. Laura Hamilton.
Well, we are set, so it's fitting that I get called next. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for your hard work, James. I'm sure this has been a fun exercise for you in your job, difficult one. I'd like to, echo Sheila's comments regarding Price Hill. We are one of the neighborhoods that has a lot of port-owned property. I'm not sure if we have the most, but I guarantee you we're at the very top of that list. And while I appreciate Mr. Ogawa's comments, none of what he said has been apparent in any of our port developments here. So that's an important thing to note. I'd like to also talk about that, I'm skeptical of this proposal for the simple reason that the report that it comes out of, which was dated March 16th. A report was requested to address affordable housing pretty specifically. And what we've heard time and again throughout the different meetings that have been had about this is that this is, it'll help affordable housing, but it's also going to be like a marketing proposal for Cincinnati to solve a revenue problem. There are a number of ways to solve that revenue problem that don't necessarily involve density. And as Ms. Mock Elliott so astutely pointed out, those should be explored. One that I would suggest would be ending the giveaway tax abatements that are giving away $88 million a year currently, which is about half of our public safety or our police budget. You said this isn't a magic bullet, but to hear the sort of comments of Councilmember Keating, with all due respect, it sounds like it's being described that way, that it's going to do all these wonderful things. And it doesn't fit in even with Plan Cincinnati, which calls for inclusionary zoning. This will lead for certain to the lifting of parking restrictions next. This is a first step. And maybe that's appropriate and maybe it's not. Neighborhood autonomy is important in that matter. And we should have the full story on the front end about what's going to happen here. Because without the lifting of the parking restrictions, this does literally nothing, in my opinion. And I think Henry and some others have alluded to that, that it has to go further to actually be effective. A number of people have used the words trickle down. And I think that's a very accurate way to describe this, in my opinion. You don't increase the supply of Ford Festivas by building more expeditions. That doesn't work in the real world. And I think housing is a lot like that. It comes at different levels for different people. So if we want to address affordable housing, we need to do things like inclusionary zoning, allowing up to a 3-family and single-family zones. Some of the other things that people have talked about, none of that is built in here. None of it at all. This will lead developers to go where the money is, and they will build, which is apparently what we're looking for to try to solve our tax problems in Oakley and Hyde Park and Mount Lookout and OTR and around that stadium in the West End. That's where this will draw them. Just like the tax abatements, they're not going to show up in Price Hill. We don't see many developers here. So this does very little on that front. And our neighborhood is probably one of the more affordable, if not the most affordable in this city, and one of the most representative integrated neighborhoods without this proposal, though that is one of the things it's supposed to solve. We're not seeing that kind of action, and yet we live in a very integrated neighborhood here that is probably the most representative of what the actual city population looks like. Finally, I want to share that I find it interesting that the vociferous supporters of this, you know, they have a skin in the game. We've got Mr. Denning and Mr. Ogawa from the port, who is, you know, for all intents and purposes, a developer, and Mr. Metz from the chamber, and Mr. Rudd, who works with a committee of the chamber, who are some of the ardent supporters here. Communities, by and large, in my travels, don't support this. I think it needs more work. I think it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to look more like Minneapolis, which is often cited, and this doesn't really look like Minneapolis at all, because they did more than just allow 3 families in a single family zone. It came with some other things. It was a comprehensive proposal. This is not. This is a one-off, let's lift regulations across the city in a blanket way that nobody asked for. And it's just not going to do what it's billed to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Cody Brooks. Amber Kassem.
Yeah, thank you. In addition to what I already wanted to say, Crystal Kendrick mentioned parking, and Chandra, Constituent Affairs, was supposed to have a menu go live for parking enforcement to be incorporated. I think that's a good point to, I guess, reiterate that the biggest concern for me, and that's already been brought up, is that adding density is not gonna be able to be supported by our current infrastructure. Some stats that I ran back in October, the West Side, Price Hill and Westwood make up 37% of vacant properties in the city. We are currently #1 for crime reported, code enforcement issues, overdoses. Everything that's bad is already here. So that's kind of my perspective on current infrastructure and service response from anywhere from the city manager's office, who I'm still waiting on a response for, on standard operating procedures that have been in place since 1980 that address these properties that have been split up from 2 to 4 to 6, who do nothing but just drain city resources and terrorize the rest of the community. I don't see this making my neighborhood better. I think that that it's not going to help economically or racially desegregate our city. More desirable neighborhoods are going to stay more desirable and become more desirable, and neglected parts of our city will continue to be the dumpster of the rest of the city. In the real world, I've seen this, and just on my street, once the 4-unit was split to a 6-unit and the neglected property or abandoned property was declared, now there are 5 vacant properties on a street that's 9 homes long. And I just don't see the same thing that maybe the more prosperous, affluent neighborhoods see. So until the city can streamline the current process, work on reiterating the city's current workflows and making them work to address the quality of life issues and securing safety on our streets and in our homes, I just don't think it's a viable solution, and things need to be fixed first. And if you guys are worried about, making development go faster, maybe don't allow communications to sit on city employee desks for weeks and months without response. Even a developer here in East Price Hill is experiencing issues with current city employees not being able to work remote and also tend to their mailbox. So let's fix those things first and really help improve quality of life for the current density before you try to sell it off as helping everyone, when really it's only going to help the people who are doing well already.
Thank you. Michelle Avery Keeley.
Yes. Hi, I'm a resident of Northside and I work in the Pendleton neighborhood of OTR. I believe that the proposed zoning change is a slipshod and reckless plan designed to benefit the area's large influential developers. In recent years and over the Rhine, with increased density allowances, we've been seeing an onslaught of new, oversized, incompatible buildings in the historic district, and even historic buildings emptied of tenants in order to double the number of units within them. Large market rate developments regularly provide parking for the tenants, yet affordable housing developments do not provide parking. This is causing hardships for existing residents. It's an unfair parking apartheid, causing a turnover to make Over the Rhine only livable for those with money, those who can afford to pay for parking. Those losing out are the elderly, persons with mobility challenges, low-income residents, and minorities. In fact, the 2020 census shows that a 43% loss of the Black population occurred in Over the Rhine over the last 10 years. Every density variance, increased density variance that is approved without a parking requirement only worsens the parking shortage. Policymakers who are repeatedly trying to take away access to parking while touting walkability just don't get it. This is not New York City or Paris, and we do not have an efficient transit system. I'm sure these policymakers have cars themselves and a nearby place to park them. So why do they think it's okay to take others' access to parking away? including the failed urban housing overlay zoning in November 2020. This is the third time the city has tried to remove the density restrictions in Over the Rhine. Despite 1 year's time and a groundswell of community opposition and foreseeable negative impacts, the city has still not done an analysis or study of the effects of doubling the allowable density on the quality of life in neighborhoods. Each one is different. Will it actually increase affordable housing or instead drive up prices of housing, especially in the desirable areas? What are the human and environmental impacts of doubling the density in areas of the city that are already overcrowded and overburdened? Where are the studies about other ideas to relieve the shortage of affordable housing? In Pendleton, all the street parking is full every evening when residents return home from work and remains full until morning and on the weekends. Within a half-mile radius from the east end of Pendleton, no off-street parking options exist. So where will the influx of new residents, existing residents, their visitors, their deliveries, and their drop-offs park? Density increases should be done only in a measured way and only where appropriate, so as not to have a negative impact on the neighborhood's quality of life. A full range of ideas to increase the supply of affordable housing should be considered, including adding housing units to the large number of vacant buildings throughout Over the Rhine, allowing accessory dwelling units in single-family neighborhoods, and a little bit greater density in single-family neighborhoods, assistance with new home ownership and keeping residents in their houses, and also correcting policies that are unduly forcing vulnerable residents out of their homes in the first place. I would like to close with a question for the city staff. Can you point to another major city that has tried this approach of removing density limitations? Another city that has tried this, and what was the outcome?
So I am not aware of another city that has taken this approach. Every time a city tries something new, a lot of times they see backlash from it until the actual until it's in place and projects can happen. But to answer your question, I am not aware of another city that has tried this. There are places that have done transit-oriented development or along transit lines. There's, it eliminates or drastically reduces density restrictions. But like you said, in this particular thing that I'm aware has not been tried. It might have been, but just from what I've seen, it hasn't yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Abby Tissell.
Hi there. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yep.
I first want to say thank you for allowing us to speak about this matter again. I've been present at a number of the prior sessions and have expressed our frustration with this ordinance. And so thank you for coming and allowing us to have this conversation. At the same time, I want to thank every single person here who is also not paid to attend these kind of seminars or to serve in this kind of way, who have occupations elsewhere and who are so deeply committed that they are here to represent their communities and their beliefs. In particular, Ms. Hamilton from Price Hill, Ms. Avery Keeley from Northside, Ms. Kendrick and Ms. King from West End. And the reason for calling out those names in particular is because I think that there is a common thread that falls within those testimonies here, which is that those individuals live in areas that are already well-developed, have significant numbers of sort of dense areas, and they themselves have found that this would not be appropriate for their communities. On numerous occasions in these meetings, we have, as communities, have said that this should not be a blanket one-size-fits-all approach, and we continue to come back requesting that that be considered. The people who are speaking here tonight are letting you know why certain communities would suffer the consequences of this, whereas others it would be more successful. And the repeated comeback of individuals who support this measure is that this works and it will it will cure all of these ails. And I just want to be super clear that no one is arguing in opposition that increasing density does not sometimes work. But the key is literature, research, science findings that's only appropriate under the conditions of the initial setting of that research. And yet we continue to try to apply these findings to lots of neighborhoods to whom it does not apply. The easy solution here is to allow for these measures to be applied not as a blanket statement with opt-out opportunities with communities who have good cause to not want them applied, to allow them to not have them applied. I would also let you know that the divide here, that the businesses and people who are developers and people who have a development interest being for the measure and those who are residents of neighborhoods and especially dense neighborhoods and vulnerable neighborhoods being opposed to it should tell our city that in its current form, this still remains an inappropriate measure for all neighborhoods. And there are vulnerable neighborhoods who have continually opposed measures like these. I think it's important to know, I'm from the Pendleton neighborhood. In my neighborhood and in our neighboring OTR, the requests for variances are what has this ordinance for removing density restrictions has been predicated upon. These requests within our neighborhoods for variances. And yet those almost all have been opposed by the neighborhoods upon which the requests were made. And so it is important for us to keep identifying the fact that there are neighborhoods who should not have these things, who are already dense, and where density has actually increased problems with pedestrian safety and sort of equal income and access to resources. In addition, the concept has been stated that we will lose people if we don't have more housing, when in fact, those of us who live in dense urban neighborhoods that are already overdeveloped or who are losing their character due to cities' approaches to development, we are currently losing residents in the urban core because our neighborhoods are being harmed by these measures. So I just ask that the city continue to hear our voices, that there is a primary call for a measure that is not blanket one size fits all, and that honors the individuals within these neighborhoods, especially the most vulnerable, or the neighborhoods who have struck a great balance, like Pendleton, where we are very diverse, not segregated by income or by race. Take a look at our census data, and where all of that has been maintained through fighting in sessions like this. And we need the opportunity to keep having a voice. These measures take away our voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Myra Greenberg. Mary Cabrini Durkin.
She's working on her.
Go ahead.
Okay. James, I'm here, but if the other lady would like to go first, that's fine. You can come back to me.
Okay. Mary, we'll go with you and then we'll come back to Myra. And you don't appear to be muted, but we can't hear you.
Me or Mary?
Mary.
Okay.
So Mary, if you want to send me an email with your thoughts, that'll be part of this. Or if you want to type them out to me, I can read them for everybody. So we'll go to Myra, and then once Mary has her comments in place, I will read those for everybody.
Okay.
So go ahead, Myra.
Okay. Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. My name is Myra Greenberg, and I live in Over the Rhine Historic District. And I live in the Pendleton area, which is part of the Over the Rhine Historic District. I agree with all of my neighbors across the city who are opposed to this. I am opposed to this proposal of doubling density in the residential mixed zones and unrestricted density in all the others. A couple of things I would like to say, that back when the historic preservation ordinance was being revised around 2012, I advocated to eliminate planned developments in historic districts of the city, and that was not taken up. And now we have seen what planned developments are really about. So I really feel like this type of zoning ordinance, and for the reasons it's being promoted and why it's being promoted and what its real purpose is that about increments, the Over the Rhine Historic District will ultimately be, with so few zoning guardrails, we will become one big planned development area. And all the underlying zoning will be wiped out, which means also our constitutional right to petition government for redress or some type of being heard was also wiped out. And then we will be inundated with externalities and negative consequences like you wouldn't believe. I believe the people from Price Hill and West End talked about that, but we have that also. Pendleton is the most dense neighborhood in all of Cincinnati, and we are pluralistic. But we also have enormous problems with out-of-state and sometimes local low-income housing tax credit developers who are sitting on properties in our neighborhood, and you cannot get them to do anything. So in terms of planned development for Over the Rhine Historic District, make the whole district, not a historic district, but a planned development district. And then if you will speak with Marion Haynes, who will talk to you privately about a first appellate court decision, we are looking at economic hardship questions that will definitely wipe us out. We will get wiped out. Our historic buildings will get wiped out. You make it unrestricted density and the scope of and scale of development, predicating the cost of poor Poopsie trying to develop more and more and more units, then we will be wiped out. There will be no reason to be landmarked as an historic district, because that first appellate court decision, which is the Davis decision, which took 7 years to get a bad decision, the Historic Conservation Board actually upheld it because of our attorney, Tim Mara, and the Zoning Board of Appeals upheld it because of the strength of what the city's decision was, but that's all been wiped out. We're going to get wiped out. If you relent to the growth segment and the economic development segment to maximize all profits, to maximize all land, intensify land use, we will be wiped out. We do not have the infrastructure to support a quality of life for people who are here now, and for those that would certainly come with all of the increased density. Already the fire department has been trying to work for safety issues for these two dense buildings. And also one developer is creating bedrooms with no windows, no light, air, ventilation, no egress to safety. Is that what you want? And rooms, apartments so small, they're like hotel rooms. That's why some of our low income people are moving out. They want larger apartments. They want light, space, air, and privacy and ventilation just like everyone else. Cincinnati and New York City have two things in common. They still house low income people in high-rise buildings. Well, Manhattan and Brooklyn might be able to do that. It's a shame we're doing it here in Cincinnati. And we are the most segregated, one of the most segregated cities. And this will do nothing to desegregate our neighborhood. And when you leave single family zones untouchable. So I am opposed, deeply opposed. And I do not think that the reasons that you are purporting that this zoning changes are actually going to work. I think that there are other different reasons that this proposal is being put forward, first by Mr. Settenfeld, Mr. Pastor, and now Ms. Keating. So I'm very much opposed to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Mary sent me a her comments in the chat. So she said, another word in regard to the importance respecting the differences among neighborhoods. We in Walnut Hills have suffered from loss of truly affordable housing. Our median income is 42% of the AMI, an indicator of the differences. We need to retain our voice about what will be good for Walnut Hills. So does that capture it, Mary? Great, thank you. And Tom Croft.
Yes, I really just have a few questions, not that many really. First of all, James, in your presentation, you gave 3 examples of other cities who had taken measures that would increase density. All of them had to do with different metrics than were used here, and it just strikes me that they were probably part of a more comprehensive plan addressing the issue of density. I believe the question's already been asked, and it was a good one. What is an example of one city that has ever taken this approach? I mean, I'm not saying that we couldn't be trailblazers, but it just seems like in a big country like this, we ought to be able to find one community, one city that did this and see how it all worked out, as opposed to moving forward on this without some more concrete idea of what the outcomes are going to be. The second question is really, it's not trivial, but you've already explained that at least in the current proposal, we're not messing around with parking or with height. I guess my question is, there's a formula for maximum building envelope, and I didn't have time to research it, but I'm wondering if that is affected by this, and you may know that off the top of your head. I did hear that term used once by you as you were making your comments earlier. The final question is, Pete Metz had an interesting statistic, and I just wanted to make sure I had it right, that there's a huge proportion of single-family homes, units being developed relative to units or residences that are part of a multifamily configuration. Did that apply to all of Greater Cincinnati or to the city of Cincinnati itself? I just wanted some clarity on that while I think about this. So those are all my questions.
Let me just finish typing this and then I'll try to answer those.
I applaud your speed in typing. I could never do that.
It's better to just do it while you're listening so you can capture it. So the first question, I am not aware of other cities that have taken this particular approach. I will say that Minneapolis probably got a lot of pushback for what they did. Seattle probably got a lot of pushback for what they did. So, I know in Cincinnati, we never like to be the first one to do anything. But in this case, I think that, it was the attempt to be bold. The second question, the maximum building envelope, it's used more in hillside overlay districts where it takes the front setbacks of properties next to it and averages them, takes the height of buildings next to it and averages them. What I was referring to for kind of that building envelope, I can go back to find it. Let's see here. This graphic. So over here, the blue is with the front setback, the side setbacks, and the rear setbacks, and then the maximum height of 45 feet tall. if you developed every square inch of the property that could be developed based on the setbacks, you would get this box. So that's basically the maximum building envelope. So even if the density was unlimited, all of those units would have to fit into this box. And you can see here with the proposed regulations, you can see, I call it maximum buildable area here. It's the same thing. How the maximum building area is the same, and the setbacks are the same. But then when you have to add more parking, and then units can only be so small based on building code, or what people are willing to, what the market says people are willing to buy or rent. So you can't just build,
Okay, I'm sorry to talk over you. I got that part.
Okay.
What I'm getting at is, does then the concept of maximum building envelope, as it is incorporated in our code, that's not really affected by this?
Correct. So if you could build a 45-foot building, tall building now, it has to be set back 20 feet from the front, 10 feet from the sides, 30 feet from the back. That is still the case under this proposal.
Well, but within the hillside districts that.
No, within the hillside, it would be the same regulations as the
Same
hillside.
regulation. That was my question. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I got you going down the wrong path.
No
Going
problem.
back to your response on the other cities. Again, looking at the three examples, they seem to be less of a sledgehammer approach, and perhaps more of a comprehensive approach. And I really think that we need to see some examples, not just from a theoretical point of view, but how increasing density through regulation can be beneficial. I just would like to see more examples of that by whatever means. I mean, if it was great in Minneapolis or Seattle using the methodologies that they used, and that could be demonstrated, well, maybe that suggests that's the method we should use. That's all.
Then to answer your third question, it appears that Pete Metz has logged off for the evening, so he's not here to answer that.
Okay.
James, I'll just jump in with two more comments. One, I just wanted to point back, I know it was referenced earlier, but there is the report linked from the administration in the on the planning site in relation to this proposal that, and I'm speaking more to the comment about kind of a comprehensive approach. And so it does lay out a bit more of a comprehensive vision. This is one component we're talking about today. The other zoning related component that I mentioned before on the staff conferences for this particular ordinance, but that will be a distinct ordinance that is related and that we've touched on a couple of times tonight, is coming out of the property tax working group. There was a recommendation for accessory dwelling units, which does touch single family home zones. And so that would be another proposal that is forthcoming that the administration is working on, that we had in response to the vice mayor who introduced the property tax working group motion that we would introduce. So that one is forthcoming and in the same realm as well.
Thank you.
John Back. Heather Estridge. Deja Rawlings. I saw her earlier. Brian Spittler.
Hi there. Thanks, James, and everyone for putting this together. Community councils and other folks around the city have always asked for this kind of engagement, and I think it's working well. I'm planning and zoning chair for the Mount Lookout Community Council. I'm also the chair for the Invest in Neighborhood Subcommittee on Economics and Housing. So we have had monthly meetings. We have a regular standing monthly meeting where any of the folks that want to attend can and talk about these discussions. I guess one of the benefits of going towards the end here is that most of the points that I was going to reiterate from previous letters that we've submitted have been already brought up, so I won't take everybody's time with that. And I believe Abigail Tassat, who speaks very eloquently, and she summed a lot of all of that up very well. I think in summary, again, what we constantly keep hearing is that one size doesn't fit all. And I'll speak briefly to the concerns in Mount Lookout and leave it at that. We know where our RM 2.0 zoning is and where it will affect our neighborhood for sure. For those of you that know Mount Lookout, we are a commuter throughway, let's call it. We talked to DOTE a lot about this, Department of Transportation and Engineering. People from the east side come right through our neighborhood. There's a lot of pass-through traffic that happens here. One of our main concerns is that looking at our zoning elements, we're very concerned with the density increasing along Linwood. We're constantly being lobbied to put in speed bumps, which, you know, that's just can't happen on Linwood. It's a state route. There's a lot of legislation issues, probably not practical in some sense, but we're constantly having accidents. I think some of you even are aware of the recent pedestrians that got hit on Linwood. That kind of speaks to the amount of traffic that comes through there. And the people died. So looking at our specific case and where this will affect us, we even have examples in that area where it's, you know, James has done a great job of explaining things in the theoretical perspective, but in the practical perspective, we don't believe that we'll even be faced with a doubling in some areas in our zones. For example, there was, to those that spoke about single family homes getting replaced, in one of our areas last year, a developer was able to come in and take down the one house, which was a single family home. And I don't think anybody was too upset about that, as much as they were with the increased problems with parking and traffic, because it was just on a cul-de-sac just off of Linwood, where they were able to put in 19 multifamily units. In addition, I just texted him because we have a very good relationship with that developer and asked what the rents were there. And the rents start at $1,400 and go up to $2,400. I would not classify that as affordable housing. So for those that speak to the affordable housing issues, there's a real life example that says that this density that has happened here is not resulting in affordable housing. Lastly, I'll close with what some folks have already said, which is that, you know, I think everybody's in theory behind some of these initiatives. It's just a question of where, when, and how. And many people on this call and in previous calls have asked for data that what data has been used to talk to these specific issues. And for me, it's a little bit unsettling that we have a lot of people that do this for a living that have come on and made some blanket statements about the situation. But when we're asking for specifics on the data, nobody spoke up about that tonight. And, you know, Mr. Denning's on here, used to be the head of the city's DCED, Community and Economic Development. Mr. Ogawa was here, but he's left. There's quite a few people in here that probably could, I would hope, could speak to some of these specifics and some of these data points that we're asking for. So that's my comments for now, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Elena Speed. Gary Wallenweber had to leave. Let's see. Anthony Isaacs.
Hi, thanks very much, James. I wanted to say first, yeah, thank you very much for putting this on. I know this is a lot of work and time on your part. I also wanted to say I'm a huge proponent of dense housing, but I'm just a layman and I can't tell how this will turn out. It seems like a very complicated issue. Many people seem very confident about it, but I'm not one of those. I keep thinking there must be a way to run a short trial to get some data on this kind of change. Has the city thought about that? Have you considered doing a short-term trial run in maybe 2 or 3 of the neighborhoods across our city that represent different demographic breakdowns of the city in different conditions, different levels of current development? And what was the outcome of that assessment from the city's perspective, I guess is my first question. And then I also just wanted to kind of comment that, let's see here. Yeah, I think it must be possible to do this at a smaller scale first, just to get an idea of what will actually happen and hopefully put a lot of people's anxiety to rest on this. I've heard a lot of discouraging references, unfortunately, to some of the common tropes you hear from wealthy neighborhoods and meetings like this. Comments like the character of the neighborhoods being destroyed or overbuilt, while at the same time hearing from other people that it actually won't make any difference in our population. This will actually just be a cash grab by greedy developers. It's possible that both things could be true because different neighborhoods could be affected differently. And I'm not going to argue that point. That's fine. But I hope we're all, I guess, humble enough to admit that we probably don't know what will happen with this kind of change. And I hope that the city can also admit that and figure out a way to test it first before trying to implement something across the entire city. Could you answer that, James, whether or not you've attempted to find a way to do this on a smaller scale?
So,
I can jump in. I mean, and thanks for your comment, Anthony. I mean, and you are right to say that it's hard with precision to chart out what really what any zoning policy will do, because they're intended as long-term policies. So, you know, they act over a number of years. But I think in this particular instance, just for this conversation on this call, and coming back to some of the information that James presented in the original presentation, which is where we've seen variance requests and where those have been approved historically for us, and the, you know, the development you've seen, and it's primarily in Over the Rhine is where we've seen density requests in the last several years. And so I think coming back to some of the council members' points, specifically about, and we all know that there's a lot of development happening over Rhine. There's a lot of different forces at play there, but specifically to the business growth and the economic activity that you see are, I think, a good indicator that we've been talking about of at least one of the very tangible impacts that density can bring.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope for the best with it if it does go through, because I do think we could benefit as a city from a lot more density, and not skyscrapers, but that missing middle density that that's talked about all over North America because of our suburban expansion experiment. But I guess time will tell if this passes. Thanks for the info.
thank you. Let's see, Maddie Senricha, I should know how to pronounce her name. Don't see her. Sarah Thomas.
Hey, James, thank you. My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm a Northside resident and business owner. I also work in community and affordable housing development. I'm here to share my support for the ordinance. I appreciate all the work that has gone into this. I, like many others, hope that this is the beginning of some progressive housing and development policy in the city of Cincinnati. It's a path forward for supporting our historic business districts and in part returning our city to the density that it once was before highways and cars and a suburban lifestyle really butchered quite a bit of the fabric. And when we talk about dense housing, I think it's really indicative of the historical fabric that is in many of our neighborhoods here, including Northside, where I live currently and have lived for a long time. We're hearing a lot of opposition from people talking about how they don't want single family homes torn down. You know, they want to protect single family home neighborhoods, et cetera. And I don't think that, you know, allowing density when appropriate and more so across the board in the city, a city that at one time was a very dense historic city with a much larger population than we have now, is not a problem, and it's not going to wipe out, you know, entire single family housing districts within the city. A lot of the buildings and homes that people live in that are here opposing this, talking about right now, would not be allowed under current zoning regulations, and should consider that a little bit more in the built environment. I think when we talk about just keeping ourselves towards low density housing because of our concerns about parking and, you know, making it easier, have a place to store your car, not having to slow down the traffic flow through neighborhoods, we're only hurting ourselves, both in our neighborhoods and our city as a whole. Increasing density can also address generational housing issues. I am very well aware of the fact that simply increasing density does not automatically create affordable housing. The city needs to do quite a bit more to fund and promote affordable housing, but this is absolutely one of the components to that. And, you know, as Councilwoman Keating said earlier, Cincinnati is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And I think there's a lot of people on the Zoom that are very shamefully happy to get on and say that we don't need to move neighborhoods around. We don't need to change anything from the way it is now. And that's just not true. And so Cincinnati, you know, a time when our neighborhoods need so many things across the board from the city, I think when we ask for solutions to a lot of the problems that we have and we see proactive growth from ordinances like this, we then pick them apart and say, we are worried about parking, we're worried about these details. But then some people come from the other side and talk about how it's not enough. It's not good enough if we're only picking one item at a time. So I think neighborhoods and individuals both, I hope that can kind of come together and start to see the broader picture of why a more dense, more transit-oriented city, which is in line with what Cincinnati once was, is better for people, considering the notion of riding the bus more often, worrying less about parking a car somewhere, welcoming more people into our neighborhoods so that we can support more small businesses in our neighborhood business districts. Those things are all cyclical and they do matter to the growth of our city. So I really appreciate your office's work on this, Councilwoman Keating, and I hope that when we take some steps to modernize policy, we continue to grow and continue to do more progressive things that will help the city grow and in turn help our neighborhoods at the core. So I fully support the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. So that, I believe, is everyone. So back to this. So we kind of talked about this. You know, nothing further is scheduled at this time. It sounded like we'll pick, and this will be you know, picked back up in around 2022. I see your hand raised, Laura. I'll get to you. But I do want to reiterate that this is a zoning text amendment. So going to the City Planning Commission will require a public hearing where everyone that has signed up for all three of these that we've done so far will be emailed on it. Community council, CDCs will be sent a mailed notice as well. Economic Growth and Zoning Committee is also a public hearing where notice is sent out, and then full City Council is the same, or it was Economic Growth and Zoning Committee. I'm not sure what committee this would go to under the new mayor and new council. But whatever council committee it goes to, it would have to follow those same rules, and then it would go to full City Council later that week. You all have my contact information. I'm gonna stop that share. Laura Hamilton, you raised your hand, so.
Very quickly, Council Member Keating mentioned at the beginning that she had some data that she would be happy to share with everyone here. And I think it would be very useful if you have that email list, if you could give that to her. So I think her assistant might be in here too, and maybe they could send it to us and we could look over some of that and see if that changes any opinions. I'd like to see it anyway. I don't know about everybody else. Thanks.
Great.
Sure. I have the data on the how the pro-density zoning helps with desegregation. James, are you okay with me putting it in chat, or would you prefer to send it out officially with the communication?
You can email it to me and I'll put it on the project website, just so it's in one place for everyone to have.
Okay.
I can email it out too.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, that is everything that I have.
Excuse me, I've been trying to get in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just like to respond to Sarah from Northside. Public transit in the city is not efficient, and people have jobs. The good jobs are regional. Less than a quarter of this region's jobs can be reached by a 90-minute or less bus ride. So how can you take people who are driving to their jobs now and all of a sudden tell them they have to take a 90-minute ride to their bus job, a 90-minute bus ride to their job? So I just wanted to say, you know, public transit is great, but we don't have it. So anyway, that's all.
So that's, I don't want to get into this argument right now. It's already after 7. But, you know, public transit it's not necessarily going to solve, you know, the 45-minute commute by car, but it does help get around the city more, and it could eliminate some trips that you might get in your vehicle to do now, that if we had better public transit, maybe you'd, you know, jump on the bus or the streetcar or something like that. Yeah, Sarah, you have your hand raised. I don't really want to get into a debate about public transit in this meeting, but go ahead.
Thanks, James. I just wanted to say one more thing in respect to that. I will point out Northside now has the second largest transit hub in the city, in the Northside Transit Center, and Cincinnati just passed a generational boost to our public transit system in issue 7. So I think those things are examples of how it doesn't all happen at one time, and things like this legislation are important to push things forward when they work together and complement each other to further develop our neighborhoods into stronger parts of our urban core and all across the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I don't have anything else. Thank you, everyone, again for coming, and we'll keep you apprised of next steps.
Thank you, James.